Oh boy, we are coming down to it. 3 games this weekend between top 20 teams, regular season championships on the line. And Andy, we are just 2 weeks away from Selection Sunday.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, the only daily year-round national college hoops show. We are your hosts, Isaac Shea. This is my guy, Andy Patton, and we want to thank you for hopping in with us. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the Locked On Network. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Well, folks, literally right before we hopped on, Kermit Davis was fired by Ole Miss. Don't get all fat and happy. Rick Pitino is not moving to Mississippi. Don't worry about that. We'll have more on that next week as names start emerging. Had a massive comeback for Illinois last night at home over Northwestern. Big stuff there. But today, we got to spend all our time getting ready for this big weekend of college basketball. Things are getting bubbly all over the place. We've got some non-bubble games. But, Andy, we have 3 games between top 20 opponents, starting with a game in the Big 12 between 2 top 10 opponents. Number 8 Texas at number 9 Baylor, 2 p.m. Eastern on ESPN. Ken Pom has this game, Bears by 2. And, Andy, here's where we're going to start with this, is Big 12 standings are on the line in a big way. Right now, Texas and Kansas are tied atop the league standings with Baylor and Kansas State 2 games back. So in this one, Texas is essentially just trying to keep pace with Kansas because the Jayhawks, with all due respect to Bob Huggins, get West Virginia at home on Saturday. So Kansas is going to get another win. Is Texas going to be able to do the same? That's what we're looking at. What do you think?
Yeah, this is going to be a really interesting game. I think we've seen Baylor kind of go through a lot of ups and downs this year. They had a losing streak early in Big 12 play. It was kind of like, oh, we're worried about Baylor. Then they rattled off a whole bunch of games in a row. Got swept by Kansas State. That was a tough one. Jerome Tang literally jumping on the table and celebrating after beating his old school. Tough to see, I imagine, for Baylor fans, as much as there's a high level of respect for Tang and what he has done at Kansas State. An interesting aspect, and listen to Locked On Baylor, Drake Toll, the host over there, he talked about this in really good detail on a recent episode. Baylor's not getting any production offensively from their front court, almost none. And Texas, that's not really their MO. They don't have, one of the big low post offensive scorers the way that a lot of other teams do. So it'll be kind of interesting to see. It's more of a matchup of backcourts. Obviously, Baylor, Adam Flagler, LJ Cryer, Keontae George, about as good, if not as good as it gets in terms of a trio of guards in the conference or in really the entire NCAA. But Texas has got a really fantastic group of guards as well. It'll be interesting to see if either team can find a way to kind of exploit mismatches down on the block, because neither team really has a low post presence. But I think whatever team can gobble up more rebounds, can score more around the rim, get more second chance points. Those are the kind of things that I think could make a really big impact in what's a monumentally huge game, not just for the Big 12 standings, but for NCAA tournament seeding as well.
Yeah, I'm with you. I see a world in which these backcourts, like on one hand, I want to say that that's the key to this game, but they could actually kind of offset each other, right? And so something I'm curious about, Jonathan Tchamwa has been working his way back, but has been coming off the bench. Like, is this a moment for Scott Drew? And he's like, all right, it's time. Are we going to see him come back into the starting lineup and relegating Flo Thamba to coming off the bench? Maybe because in a world where we need more production from our front court, I know somebody who can give that. Yeah. And right now he's coming off the bench. So that's something to keep an eye on, certainly. For me, one of the biggest issues with Baylor is their defense. Yeah. That offense right now is number 2 in Ken Pom efficiency. Meanwhile, the defense hanging on inside the top 100. And so that could be the Achilles heel for Baylor, not just in this game, but going forward. So if they can get a little more resistance with their defense, especially there at home in Waco, that could be big time to get this win over Texas. Now, you talked about the NCAA tournament side of it all. Well, going forward, we look at these top 4 teams all separated by just 2 games. It's Texas that has by far the most difficult road on paper.
Yeah.
They've got this game at Baylor, then they're at TCU, and then they wrap up at home against Kansas. Whereas you look at the other teams, Baylor's is pretty tough. This game at home against Texas, at Oklahoma State, and then at home against Iowa State. But the Kansas schools, I mean, it's almost fluff Big 12 schedules get. Kansas hosts West Virginia, hosts Texas Tech, and then is at Texas, and then Kansas State at Oklahoma State versus Oklahoma, and then at West Virginia. So K-State has the easiest schedule of these top four. And so that's going to be interesting. But in terms of these two teams in this game, Baylor and Texas, when we got that top 16 reveal last week, Texas was 5th in the overall S curve with Baylor 7th. That meant that they're both 2 seeds, but that Texas got that coveted Kansas City regional while Baylor was shipped off to Louisville. And so like it's not just Big 12 seeding, it's these kind of things that are in play in this one as well.
Absolutely. It'll be really interesting to see if Baylor can kind of keep that momentum, get another win here, and potentially move themselves into a much more desirable position for the NCAA tournament, because, Baylor's defense right now at 94th in KenPom, that doesn't look like the recipe to make a deep run in the NCAA tournament. Quite honestly, it doesn't. I think the studies have said that you have to be a top 40 team offensively and a top 25 team defensively. Every team that has ever won an NCAA tournament in the KenPom era has been in those 2 categories. Top 25 defensively, top 40 offensively. Now, I don't know off the top of my head if those numbers are calculated before the NCAA tournament or afterwards, which is a pretty significant factor. Regardless, Baylor is well outside of that. So if they can't figure out a way to improve defensively, they're going to have a serious issue. But finding a way to get a better seed, maybe get a more desirable draw, at least can get you maybe easier path to the Sweet 16 from there. Maybe you can pick off a few games and turn the season around a little bit.
That would be the hope, certainly. Well, Andy, again, KenPom has this game. Baylor by 2. Texas won the last game in Austin, 76-71. The Bears come in on this 2-game losing streak, albeit both on the road, but they do need to get right, kind of get things back turned around. What are you going with, Andy? Are we hooking them, or you got some Bears?
I think Texas is going to take this one. I think Texas, because the guard play has been so good. Obviously, that's true in both situations. We haven't seen Baylor make very good adjustments. They had a 33-point swing in that game against Kansas earlier. I think wasn't quite as dramatic of a swing against Kansas State, but they were still winning at halftime. Still ended up losing by double digits in that one. Scott Drew's got to find ways to make adjustments. We haven't seen him do that the last few games. If he does not do that against Rodney Terry and the Longhorns, I think they're going to pull off a victory there.
I'm right with you. At this point, for me, it's not will Rodney Terry get this job? It's how long will the contract be and how much will it be worth? And to that point, I think Texas is going to take this one as well. What I love about this Longhorns team is that there's just about any guy that can be the dude in any given game. It was Jabari Rice the last time they played. I mean, it could be Tyrese Hunter. It could, whomever. And so I'm looking, I like that unpredictability out of the Longhorns. And I think that front court overcomes Baylor's, whether it's Thamba or Chamwa Chachua. And we are going to see Texas going back to Austin with a win and keeping pace with Kansas in the Big 12 standings.
Well, College Game Day is not going to be in Waco this week, despite the epic matchup there. It's not going to be in Indiana for the Indiana-Purdue game. It's going to Spokane, Washington to watch the Zags take on the St. Mary's Gales. Top 15 matchup between these two teams. Going to be a really, really fun one in Spokane. We're going to break that down coming up right after a message from today's sponsor, FanDuel. The midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because new customers get a no-sweat first bet of up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and threes drained. Maybe you like Gonzaga to score more points than St. Mary's is projected to give up on Saturday night. Maybe you like something about the Indiana-Purdue game to bet on there. You can even combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Isaac, Zags Gales, Spokane, Washington, college game day. Jay Billis is in the house. He's finally, hopefully, going to do his 94-foot walk with Drew Timme. I don't know if you followed this story at all, but Drew Timme called Jay Billis out on his Gimme Timme podcast, said, "Hey, Jay, why haven't we ever done a 94-foot walk together?" So I'm hoping that they'll get a chance to do that, but it is going to be an absolutely raucous environment in Spokane.
Just to be a turd, I hope Billis like takes the other four. Like I want to see Rasir Bolton and Strother.
Yeah, go take Dwayne Strother instead.
He's over there on the bench like this.
He's going to let him hear it if that ends up being the case for this one. This is a really, really fun matchup, Isaac, between two fantastic teams and two really different styles of teams. I think that's my favorite aspect of this matchup. Pretty much every time these two teams plays, you got Mark Few, you got Randy Bennett. They've both been in the WCC for 20 plus years. Gonzaga's gotten all the attention, but St. Mary's has been a dang good basketball team for a really long time. They play a slow, methodical Virginia style with 29 seconds on the shot clock, really slow pace, really good defensive team. Gonzaga is go, go, go. They've always been that way. They're a little slower this year just because they don't have as consistent of outlet passers, as consistent of point guards to kind of get the ball moving out in transition, but a really unique matchup. And last time it was all you could ask for. It was all that you could have asked for between these two teams last time. Gonzaga jumped out to an early lead, kind of looked like they were coasting for a while. Aiden Mahaney, star freshman point guard for the Gales, absolutely took over. And Thursday's game between the Zags and San Diego, the announcers Dave Fleming and Dan Dickow were describing that performance as perhaps the single most critical and important and really best individual 6-minute stretch of basketball that any player has played this year. That was a pretty intense statement, but in a lot of ways, it's arguably true to win a rivalry game like that, to take over first place in the standings in the WCC conference that St. Mary's struggles to win because of the presence of Gonzaga. It was a really, really nice performance from him, and you can bet more than anything in the world that Aiden Mahaney, a kid who grew up 5 minutes from Moraga, California, who's wanted to beat Gonzaga his whole life, he gets to go to Spokane on college game day. He is going to be locked and loaded. I'm excited about this matchup, Isaac. I'm curious what you think about how this thing might shake out on Saturday night.
Interestingly for me, I think the Mahaney of it is kind of like, yeah, let that happen. Mm-hmm. For me, it's more about Logan Johnson, who did not have a good game last time. Like, he's got to step up for Randy Bennett and the Gales. I think it's more about Mitchell Saxon and what he can do in the post. And so if, let's assume Mahaney is not going to have the 35 minutes of not great basketball or not, his usual level of basketball that he did last time. Let's assume that he's getting his and Drew Timme's getting his. For the Gales, I think it's chiefly about Logan Johnson and chiefly about Mitchell Saxon and how they do. And I also want to thank St. Mary's, by the way, I forgot to say this, for after they beat Gonzaga, dropping their next game at LMU so that it could set up this wonderful matchup for the regular season WCC Conference Championship. So thank you, LMU, for what you did to help us all out in this. But yeah, it is those two guys that I think help determine things. Logan Johnson being the upperclassman there, and somebody who brings that experience into good luck going into the kennel with game day there with Jay Billis in the house, right? Like they're going to have to be ready and dialed in if they're going to have because I could see a world in which we get all this buildup and then Gonzaga just boat races St. Mary's in this one. Yeah, absolutely. That's what they did to LMU. Quite honestly, LMU, not the same caliber of team as St. Mary's. I'm not going to pretend that they are. Shout out Cam Shelton, though. Fantastic player for the Lions. Had a really nice game against Gonzaga. I think he had 27. The first time these two teams met, he had over 30 against St. Mary's in that game. But the thing that really stands out to me about St. Mary's right now is the play of Logan Johnson. You mentioned him obviously as a key part. He had 12 points on 4 of 14 shooting the last time these two teams played. Since then, Isaac,
Do you want to know what he's done in his last five games?
Tell me, Andy.
Here's what he's done. 31 points in 43 minutes against LMU on 12 of 20 shooting. Next game was at Portland, 34 points on 11 of 18 shooting in that one. Then he had a dud at San Diego. He only had 3 points in that one. Granted, he only took 3 shots. He also had 8 rebounds. So, you can stomach that. Next game, 27 points in 40 minutes against BYU on 12 of 19 shooting. And then in his most recent game against Pacific, 32 minutes, 29 points on 12 of 15 shooting. This man has been on an absolute heater since the last time Gonzaga and St. Mary's played. He is carrying a ton of momentum. If he comes in and plays the way that he's capable of playing, his way of attacking the basket, getting to the rim, Gonzaga doesn't have a ton of rim protection. If he can do that, take away some of Gonzaga's defense, force them to pay attention to him, let Aiden Mahaney go off on the other end, it could be a really, really tough night in Spokane for the Zags.
And we will have to watch things because if Gonzaga wins at home, which seems like the more likely of the two scenarios, we will have a regular season tie. And based on the WCC tiebreakers, that means we will all be watching. We're going to be hitting refresh repeatedly on Sunday morning because when the net rankings refresh, whichever of these teams comes out the higher rated will be the team that gets the 1 seed in the WCC tournament starting next Thursday. And so that is, to me, the most intriguing, but also frustrating, like coin flippy side of all of this. So that is how it's going to play out in the event that Gonzaga wins. Andy, Ken Palm has it, Zags -2. Is the spirit of Adam Morrison going to be alive and well, or will we have him pounding his fists on the court in fury?
I think Gonzaga is going to take this one. I think they're going to take it by more than 2, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's certainly less than 10, probably less than 5. I think it's going to be a close game all the way throughout. I think Gonzaga jumped out to an early lead last time. I could see that happening again with the crowd, with the energy, the enthusiasm. But one of the things we know about Randy Bennett's teams is they rarely get blown out, and there's a reason for that, because of their pace, because of their style, because of their poise, because of how well coached they are. I think this team is going to hang around. I don't think they're going to let Gonzaga put them away entirely. And I think we're going to see a second half comeback. I don't know if it'll get all the way to the point that it did last time, but I think that this is a game that's probably going to end up scaring the heck out of a lot of Gonzaga fans, as I think many people are expecting it to.
And to that point, I think it will be incumbent upon Gonzaga to find the right shots. Don't let that defense dictate the 100%. Flow offensively for Mark Few's club. And so if they're able to do that, get the ball where it needs to be, give up good shots in favor of better shots, Gonzaga will win this game. That 2-point margin, I think it'll be a close game, but they cover 2 points, I think. Yes. And so we'll see that. Now, elsewhere, a little bit earlier in the night for all the Eastern time folks who are going to be yawning by the time Gonzaga and St. Mary's tips off, we've got 17 Indiana at number 5 Purdue, 7:30 Eastern time on Fox. Andy, Purdue is favored by 8 in this game. That line seems wildly big to me. Am I off on that, or what do you think?
I think they're getting a little bit of home cooking for being at home in this one. Indiana won by 5 in Bloomington the last time these two teams played. Indiana did just suffer a pretty tough loss to Michigan State. I think they lost by 15 in that game at home for Michigan State in East Lansing. Obviously, there was a little bit more to that game in terms of some emotion for the Michigan State crowd after the mass shooting that happened on campus. Spoke with Matt Sheehan, the host of Locked On Spartans, about that on Thursday's episode. But Indiana is going to be looking to complete the sweep here. This is a really impactful game for them. I like the matchup between these two teams because I think you can see some similarities. Both have a really, really dominant low post presence in Trace Jackson Davis at Indiana. Of course, Zach Edey, the National Player of the Year frontrunner for Purdue. They both have young, inexperienced backcourts. Purdue's backcourt was kind of not expected to be super elite this year, and they have turned out to be better than advertised. Matt Painter once again continuing to get prospects who weren't as highly regarded as they end up performing in college. He's very, very good at that. It's a reason he often shows up on Coach of the Year rankings during the season. Indiana, of course, Jalen Hood-Schifino has been a huge part of what they've done, and they kind of go as he goes, it seems, in a lot of ways. When he has really, really good games and takes over, uses his size, his physicality as a guard, his playmaking ability, the Hoosiers seem at times unbeatable when he's playing the way that he can play. But we've also seen games where he has 3 points on misses 10 or 11 shots in the same game and can kind of be, I don't want to say unplayable, but can be in a position where Indiana needs him to step up, and he's just unable to do so. And that's kind of the struggles of playing freshman guards a lot, because freshman guards, especially towards the end of the year, you see this a lot. This is not uncommon for them to kind of have more inconsistent performances down the stretch, because it's a long season, and you're not used to playing 35 games in a year, and going to Purdue in late February when you've been going as hard as you possibly can since November, that's not an easy task at all. So I think this is going to be a fascinating matchup. I think Edey and Trace Jackson Davis, I don't want to say they cancel each other out, but they're both really, really dominant low post players. But it'll kind of come down, in my mind at least, to how some of those younger guards can respond in what's going to be the biggest regular season game that any of them have ever played.
That is great insight, Andy. It's all about which of these young backcourts can hold up better. As you'll recall, as we've talked about before on the show, that was a big part of why Indiana won the first game in Assembly Hall, is because Purdue had those multiple turnovers down the stretch in the final 2 minutes, many of which weren't even Braden Smith and Fletcher Loyer, the freshman backcourt. It was Zach Edey himself. And so if Purdue hangs onto the ball better, and honestly, it might not even matter down the stretch, because they might have already developed such a lead. But I do think I will go right with you. And I think it is fair to say that in many ways, Edey and Trace Jackson Davis will cancel each other out. And then that brings me to look at an X factor. Like if there's anything outside of those young backcourts, is there like a wild card that comes out of it? Somebody like Caleb Firsch for Purdue, or Race Thompson for Indiana, that really puts an imprint on the game. So, 8 points, Andy, big stretch there. Is that a too big spread for Purdue, or can they cover that?
I think it's going to be within 5 points. I think this game's going to be within 5 points, and I think it could honestly go either way. I'm going to lean Purdue. They're at home. They're going to want to split this series here. I think they're probably going to win it, but and it's hard because you could be up by 4 in the last minute or in the last 90 seconds and end up winning by 9 because of free throws. And that's what makes these kind of things so complicated. So could I see it being an 8-point game? Yeah, I absolutely could. Do I think that it's going to be like a 10 or 15 or 18-point win for Purdue? Absolutely not. I think this game's going to come down to it. I think it's going to be 38 minutes of competitive basketball. There's a chance that it changes after that, but I would probably stay within that range and think Purdue wins by less than 8, but it's going to be a good one. It's going to be a really fun one.
Game flow will certainly dictate that final spread, but I would be with you, all things equal, that it will be Purdue to win outright, but Indiana to cover the spread. Just a couple. We're going to get bubbly here in just a second, but before we do, just a quickle. That's a fun new word that we just made up. Let that forever be in our lexicon. A few quick other non-bubbly games on coming up this weekend. Arkansas at Alabama, 2 p.m. on Saturday on ESPN2. How will Brandon Miller follow up that historic performance for himself in his first game after all the new information came out earlier in the week? We've got Auburn at Kentucky, 4 on CBS. This is a very interesting game to me. Kentucky's been playing much better. Auburn, not as much. Big opportunity for the Tigers to go get a win. Creighton at Villanova, noon on Fox on Saturday. Creighton missed a massive opportunity midweek to beat Marquette, keep themselves in the Big East regular season conversation as far as the championship goes, but weren't able to get the victory. And so looking to follow up at Villanova, who's got Justin Moore back and playing better. Texas A&M at Mississippi State, 3:30 on SEC Network. Neither of these teams you look at as sexy names, but they are both making an impact in the SEC. Texas A&M should be right behind Alabama's second place in the conference when the regular season ends. And in another important Big Ten game, Northwestern at Maryland. This one's on Sunday, noon on the Big Ten Network. Northwestern, as we talked about, lost that 19-point lead they had over Illinois on Thursday evening, costing themselves an opportunity probably to have any hope of a Big Ten regular season championship, but they still are very much alive for getting the second seed. Well, Andy, we do want to get super bubbly, just dropping all those bubbles in the bathtub and talk about some bubble games coming up this weekend, and we'll do that in just a second. Okay, Andy. Some bubble talk for the weekend as we are just 2 weeks away from Selection Sunday. In fact, we already have 5 conferences with a regular season champ. I'll just run through them alphabetically. America East, Vermont, the Catamounts, love it. Congrats. Big South, UNC Asheville. Ohio Valley is Morehead State. Patriot League is Colgate. And Summit League, Oral Roberts. One more from Max Asmus. Hopefully we can get him back into the tournament and let that little dude go off.
Yep.
So for the listeners, for the watchers, we will be using Joe Lenardi's bracketology for ours just to give it a helpful framework. As always, Andy, we know that the bubble is weak. That's what happens when you let 68 teams into this thing. Please do not let more in. I beg you. The key to all of this bubble talk for all of these teams is to win games.
Mm-hmm.
If you win games, you don't have to keep your eye on the bubble because you just move up in. And why is that? Because all the rest of these teams are going to keep taking L's.
Mm-hmm.
That's why they're on the bubble, is because winning games is hard for these teams. That's why they're in this position to start with. So you win, you put yourself in a good spot to keep your hold in the bracket. In terms of terminology, because people always, like my father-in-law asked me about this last night. What does it mean when you're a last four? And he's a Texas Tech guy. That's why he's asking about it. So last four buys, that means that you are safely in the bracket. You don't have to go to Dayton to the play-in. Well, I shouldn't say safely, but you are in it as of the current time. Last four in. That means you are one of the 4 at-large teams that'll be shipped off to Dayton, which, by the way, Dayton should be all at-large teams. I'm not getting on that soapbox right now, but automatic qualifiers should all be automatically in the tournament. Anyway, and then first 4 out means that you are not in the NCAA tournament, either safely in the bracket or being shipped off to Dayton. Typically, those 4 teams are your 1 seeds in the NIT. So that's the 3 kind of categorizations we have of the bubble teams. Andy, lots of games coming up featuring bubble teams this weekend. Where do you want to start?
I'll start with Penn State. Penn State playing Rutgers on Sunday. Currently, they are one of the top teams on the first 4 out. They are kind of right in that conversation. Again, not going to get into an entire soapbox about the kind of teams that are on the bubble right now, but Penn State is less than 500 in the Big Ten. The Big Ten, a solid basketball conference top to bottom, but feel like you should try to be above 500 in that conference in order to get in, but that's probably where Penn State's going to need to be. They got Rutgers on Sunday. They're on the road at Northwestern next Wednesday. They got Maryland next Sunday. They need 2 of those 3. There's a chance they need all 3 of them. If they can get 2 of them, I think they're in an okay spot. They've won 3 straight. They won at Ohio State. That was a really big win for that team. But this Penn State team is in a really, really precarious position right now. I think they have a chance to pull off, to get themselves at or above 500 in the Big Ten. That might be enough, depending on what kind of performance they put together in the Big Ten Conference Tournament. But this team, as we're talking about, they're right on that bubble. They need to win, again, at least 2 of these games, probably all 3 of them, if they want to safely find themselves in the field of 68.
I cannot believe I'm going to say this team in bubble talk, but the Texas Tech Red Raiders, who started out Big 12 play 0-8, what on earth, are now in the bubble conversation. They are currently at the top of the next 4 out. They've won 4 straight and 6 of their last 8. They're up to 5-10 overall in Big 12 play. They have 3 games left. They host TCU on Saturday. They're at Kansas midweek, and then they host Oklahoma State to end the regular season. As you would expect in the Big 12, 2 of those 3 games are quad 1 opportunities, and the Oklahoma State game is a quad 2 opportunity. Texas Tech could legitimately finish Big 12 play 8-10. Are they going to? Probably not, because going to Kansas is a lot to ask. But as good as the Big 12 is, would 7-11 be enough, depending on what they do in Big 12 tournament? I'm not sure. We're going to find out. But the fact that Texas Tech has put themselves in this position is awesome. Good job, Mark Adams and crew.
Well, speaking of teams that we're surprised to see on the bubble for a different reason here, Tar Heels. of North Carolina, preseason #1. They have fallen to the point where they are on the bubble, in part because they do not have any quad 1 wins. They had a couple wins earlier in the season that were quad 1 at the time, have not lasted as quad 1 teams since then. They're taking on Virginia. This is a huge game for Hubert Davis and the Tar Heels. Massive game here. You need this one. They won at North Dakota. They won at Notre Dame. That's what ND stands for. They won at Notre Dame on Wednesday. That's a nice win for them. Not a huge win necessarily, but would have been a devastating loss.
Quad 3.
Yeah, would have been a quad 3 loss. You cannot handle that right now. Again, third in the first 4 out right now for the Tar Heels. Virginia's been struggling a little bit lately. They lost at Boston College. That was a huge win for the Eagles. Tough loss for Tony Bennett's squad. Barely beat Barely beat Notre Dame and barely beat Louisville as well. So Virginia's a little bit vulnerable right now. Perhaps the Tar Heels can come in. Maybe the backcourt, Caleb Love, RJ Davis can find a way to work together on the basketball court, get Armando Bacot involved and pull off a really big victory and put themselves back into the field in a more comfortable position.
We've got a Big Ten game between 2 bubble teams, Michigan and Wisconsin. Can't believe that we're similar to Texas Tech. Can't believe we're talking about Michigan in the bubble conversation, but we are. They won at Ohio State on Thursday, at Rutgers on Thursday. And currently, Michigan has put themselves third in Lunardi's next 4 out. So they're pretty far off being in the tournament right now, but they've got enough left in the Big Ten to be able to do it. And they host Wisconsin there in Ann Arbor on Saturday, And Wisconsin themselves, they are third in the last 4 in. So a win for them on the road in Ann Arbor would hopefully do great to solidify their standing and maybe move them out of having to go to Dayton. So they're looking to do that. By the way, saw a great video of Coach Jim Harbaugh helping a policeman move a dead tree off the road during all the ice going on in Michigan. Cool stuff to see. I know that's football, but always fun to see. Interesting, important game in the Big Ten there, Michigan versus Wisconsin.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest bubble games that you're going to see this weekend for folks who like to watch those kinds of contests. Clemson at NC State is another big one. Clemson right now second in the next 4 out, have kind of fallen apart a little bit lately after being briefly in first place in the ACC. They've now just won 2 of their last 6 games. They got NC State on the road on Saturday, like we said. They also got Virginia on the road on Tuesday. Really tough couple of matchups for the Tigers. If they can win even one of those, it'll help them quite a bit. But if they lose both of them, which I'm suspecting right now without having seen the lines that they are not favored in either of those matchups, if they lose both of them, I think that their bubble hopes will have, for lack of a better word, popped.
Well, a couple others we'll just run you through really quick. Kansas State at Oklahoma State. The Cowboys are the last 4 in team right now. Big time opportunity with Kansas State coming to Stillwater. USC at Utah. USC is last 4 in. Utah's off the bubble consideration. Had an opportunity against UCLA on Thursday and just couldn't do it. USC is at home versus Arizona and Arizona State to close out. And then San Diego State at New Mexico. The Aztecs are playing incredible basketball right now. New Mexico, a little less so. They're in the next 4 out right now, but they are 14-3 at home. And then they also have Fresno State and at Colorado State to close out.
Well, we're going to be back on Monday, folks. We're going to call it a day here. So many more games we could have previewed. So many fantastic contests coming up this weekend. I am going to be locked on the couch all weekend long watching some fantastic basketball. We'll be back with you to recap the weekend on Monday, to talk about our top 5s, to talk, of course, about the 6-pack. We're going to continue to do more bubble coverage for the next couple of weeks as we get closer and closer to Selection Sunday.
Andy, I don't want you on the couch for these bubble games. I need you in a bubble bath, drink in hand, getting bubbly.
There you go. I think I can handle that. I'll move the TV in there. I think we can do that. My wife will be fine with that.
I need a camera. Let's go.
All right, we're going to come back. Leave us a review on iTunes. Follow us on YouTube. Subscribe on YouTube. Leave us comments, whatever it may be. Love interacting with all of you as we get closer and closer to March Madness. For now,